Hello everyone, welcome to ET Markets Worldview, where we discuss everything related to your investments, global markets, and more. I'm Neha Vashisht Mahajan, and today we are going to discuss US bond yields and what the rise of these yields signify. And for that, I have Mr. Abhishek Banerjee, CEO and founder of Lotus Dew, with me. Welcome to ET Markets, Mr. Abhishek.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Just to give a little background to the audience as well, why we're talking about this topic is because the aftermath of US bond yields going up by 5% in the US led to a major market crash in India as well. The yield on 10-year US Treasury note rose above 5% on Monday, hitting the July 2007 milestone. The 10-year yield touched 5.004% on Monday, up around 8 bps on the day. Now, it was briefly bid at a 16-year high of 5.001% as well on Thursday, and it has risen 160 basis points since mid-May. Now, my first question to you, Mr. Abhishek, is that if someone is not aware why this happened and how this affects Indian markets, I want you to tell them how these US bond yields affect Indian markets and what does it signify.
So, government bonds are bonds that a government issues to fund their lack of tax collection generally, right? So, let's say that the only source of earning for government is tax collection, levies and fees and tariffs, and these are the basket of the way the government earns. So, what they earn and how much they want to spend, there is a difference, and this is called budget deficit, right? And this budget deficit is funded by borrowing from the future earnings of the government, very much like how we purchase homes, that we want to purchase an asset. Our immediate savings and income might not be sufficient to buy that home, but we are able to get a home loan because the bank believes that in future we'll be able to pay off whatever we have borrowed. So similarly, a government can borrow. uh, the difference between what a government can do and what an individual can do is that a government can print money. So, printing money in a very simple sense is that if you could log into your net banking today and decide how much money you want to have as bank balance, you just enter that number and that becomes the money. That is what printing money actually is. It's not really paper printing, but it's determining the supply of currency in a particular economy. So, the government, on one hand, they are able to borrow, right? On the other hand, they're able to print money. So one might assume that they can infinitely borrow and infinitely print money to supply the
Right.
obligations. When you do this, and sometimes governments do this, it impacts the credibility of your currency because you're printing money which doesn't exist, which means that the money supply keeps on increasing. That
Hmm.
increases inflation. That decreases the value of that currency or credibility. Going back to 1972, you had pre-Bretton Woods era, where every currency in the developed economy was backed by tonnage of gold. So the gold was basically redistributed as paper currency. Beyond 1972, it's called fiat currency. Fiat in Latin means faith, which means that you just trust that the currency is valuable, and that's why you hold the currency. Now, uh, as of now, right, US dollar is the de facto reserve currency. Um, it is still about 56% of global trade, right? So compared to that, renminbi is 2.5%. India is in second decimal. Rupee trade.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that uh, even though let's say US government can print money and meet its obligations, it is the paper gold, right? So there is no better standard available, or there's no second option right now. So what is actually happening is that on one hand, ball needs are increasing. China has been dumping US treasuries at a pretty alarming rate. So the US treasuries
Hmm.
holdings have gone down from 1.3 trillion to about 800 billion. So they sold 700 billion worth of US treasury. And the deficit fiasco, or the budget deficit being handled by government shutdown, that is pushing credibility of the US government to come to a political consensus to meet these budget deficits through printing money at risk. Because of these
Right.
reasons, what is happening is that uh, inflation is increasing because obviously they are printing money to meet budget deficit. B, they are not able to build consensus politically to keep on increasing the debt ceiling, even though there is no second option. That's become a political tool rather than a monetary tool. And the third thing is that
Right.
global holders of US Treasury like China or any other country that is looking at weaponization of the reserve currency that US did with Russia as a possible threat, and removing holdings, which is also basically selling these treasuries. So all this culminating is causing the bond yields to go up, which is impacting the local economy. And the Federal Reserve also is increasing rates at the same time while they're trying to control inflation. So their target is 2% inflation. Right now in US, it's running anywhere between 6 to 8% depending on how you measure. So uh, all put together, they're trying to slow down the consumption in US so that
Hmm.
they can cool off the economy and hence keep it under check, the inflation. Now, while this is happening, the US consumer has not stopped spending. The US job market has
Yeah.
not slacked. So what it is a kind of a conundrum where US consumers, they're dipping into their credit cards, they're dipping into their savings that they made during the COVID times, and they're continuously consuming, and as a relief consumption after the lockdown. So all this put together has pushed out government bond yields.
How it's affecting Indian markets in general.
We import oil, we process imported oil and refine it and send it back. What happens is that when bond yields are around 5%, and let's say in India, a 10-year treasury in India is quoting 7%, right? So just to put it in
Hmm.
context, US government bond is rated double A, triple A, right? And we are rated just above junk status, which is, high yield. We are basically right at the border. There's just a 2% delta between these two yields, right? And
Yeah.
what we are experiencing is that because of this delta, there is a possibility that US dollar might strengthen further, because
Hmm.
they are able to become the reserve currency. On the contrary, there's an opposing force that because the delta between the yields is so low, Indian rupee might actually become more expensive, which will hurt exporters, which will hurt IT services, which will hurt generally Nifty, because most of the Nifty earnings are export driven. So in this situation, the way the feed through works is first through the FX channel, which means that
Hmm.
because we trade in US dollar, if US dollar were to strengthen, which is against the general mechanic of bond yields increasing, the dollar should weaken. If you notice, while the bond yields have continuously weakened, bond yields have continuously risen, the FX has not really lent up, right? So the rupee has held while the bond yields are increasing, which is a new kind of a situation. In this,
Hmm.
as the dollar becomes more expensive, we import that inflation into India, because now we have to pay more for that oil that we still need to consume. And
Yeah.
because of the effects impact, that creates an inflationary pressure on India. On the contrary, because India has managed their monetary policy so well compared to every other country, uh, Indian rupee should strengthen. So these two opposing forces are acting upon each other,
Hmm.
and basically rupee has sort of held stable, right? But it
Yeah.
can change quite significantly, quite rapidly, because FX is a very liquid and large and almost 24/7 traded market. So you might have an overnight move that is pretty large, and that can impact
Yeah.
generally the market. So the impact on Indian equity is on two accounts. One is on the FX side. Second, because bond yields in US have risen so much, and that is supposed to be the
Hmm.
risk-free rate, the way discounting happens on equity valuation is using risk-free rate that currently we use kind of Indian government bond yields. But if you benchmark it to global standards, the cost of capital might be more expensive than what is getting priced in. So therefore, there'll be compression on the P ratio, as and hence essentially you'll see equity markets reacting, because typically when you do fundamental valuation, 70% of the value is in the terminal value of the equity, and 30% is the next 5-year cash flow projection. So
Okay.
as the cost of capital increases, this 70% gets impacted the most. So 70% of your value is at stake on interest rate risk, whereas only 30% is at stake on your execution capability as a management.